Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel Legal Decipher. In the previous video, we had talked about Chapter 22 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. If you have not seen that video, you can go and check it. The link is in the description below. Today, we are going to talk about Chapter 23 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. We'll go through the chapter and try to understand how the Criminal Procedure Code is followed and how the criminal courts work. So if you are new here, please like and subscribe to my channel so you can get the video notifications. So let's get started. So today we are going to learn chapter 23, which talks about evidence in inquiries and trials. So when a court proceedings is held, then in that proceedings, at the stage of evidence, how the court performs, we will learn in this chapter. So the procedure of taking evidence in any enquiries and trials is what this chapter talks about. So section 272 says that language of the court shall be determined by the state government, and such language of each court within the state shall be other than the High Court. Now section 273 talks about evidence to be taken in presence of accused. So it says that any evidence that is taken in the course of a trial or other proceedings, it shall be taken in the presence of the accused, or where the personal attendance of such accused is dispensed with. That means in cases where such personal appearance of the accused is not necessary, then that evidence will be taken in the presence of the pleader of such accused. Now provided that where the evidence is taken of a woman who is below the age of 18 years and who has been alleged to be subject to rape or any other sexual offense, then the evidence that is to be recorded, in that evidence the court may take appropriate measures. So while recording such evidence of that woman who is below the age of 18 years and who is alleged to have been subject to rape or any other sexual offense, then in that case the court will take appropriate measures to ensure that such woman is not confronted by the accused while she is cross-examined by the pleader of the accused. Now section 274 talks about record in summons case and inquiries. So what will be the procedure of recording evidence when summons case inquiries are held? It says that in all summons case tried before a magistrate where inquiries under section 145 to 148 and in all proceedings under section 446, otherwise in course of a trial, when the magistrate is holding an inquiry in a summons case, then he shall, as the examination of each witness proceeds, make a memorandum of the substance of the evidence in the language of the court. So there is a language of the court, and in that language the magistrate will prepare a memorandum. A memorandum of what? A memorandum of the substance of the evidence. In each case, whenever an examination is recorded, that will be made into a memorandum. Now provided that if the magistrate is unable to make such memorandum himself for reasons of his inability, then he will cause such memorandum to be made in writing or from his dictation in open court. So when he is unable himself to make such memorandum due to any inability, then he may cause to make such memorandum, and it will be made in writing and dictated by that magistrate in open court, and such memorandum shall be signed by the magistrate and shall form a part of that record. So it will be always a part of the record and it shall be always signed by the magistrate. Let's move on to section 275. It talks about record in warrant cases. So in all warrant cases that are tried before a magistrate, the evidence of each witness as the examination proceeds will be taken down in writing either by the magistrate himself or by the dictation in open court. So in warrant cases as well, the examination will be taken down in writing by the magistrate or by his dictation in open court by somebody else if he is unable to do so owing to a physical or other incapacity. So if the magistrate is somehow physically incapable, then he will dictate such examination to be taken down in writing in open court, and under his direction and superintendence any other officer of the court appointed by him in this behalf will do so, will take down the examination in writing. Now, provided that evidence of a witness under this subsection may also be recorded by audio, video, electronic means in the presence of the advocate of the person accused of the offence. So, evidence of a witness may also be recorded by audio, video, electronic means in the presence of the counsel or advocate on behalf of the accused. Where the magistrate causes the evidence to be taken down, he shall record a certificate that the evidence could not be taken down by himself for the reasons referred to in subsection 1. So, where the magistrate is somehow incapable of taking down the evidence by himself as referred to in subsection 1, the reasons that are recorded in subsection 1, if those are the reasons behind the magistrate not taking down the evidence by his own, then he shall record a certificate as to why such evidence could not be taken down by himself. And such evidence shall ordinarily be taken down in the form of a narrative. So what will be the procedure of taking down such evidence? It will be in the form of a narrative. But the magistrate may, in his discretion, take down or cause to be taken down any part of such evidence in the form of question and answer. So, by going through this subsection, we understand that there are two procedures that are followed by a criminal court in taking down an evidence of a witness or anyone else. What are the two forms? The first form is narrative. That means it will be like an essay. It will be written down like a narration that such and such had happened, such and such was asked, and this person who is giving that evidence has said this. Now, the examination or the evidence can also be taken down in the form of a question and answer. So, another format is the question and answer format. In this format, the magistrate will record the entire examination in question answer format. That means the question will be written down as to what was asked, and the answer would be written down below it as to what witness who was so examined had answered to such question. So these are the two formats that are followed. The evidence so taken down shall be signed by the magistrate and shall form the part of a record, obviously. Now, let's move on to section 276. It talks about record in trial before court of sessions. So let's understand that this section is nothing new. This is the same procedure that is followed in a magistrate's court as well as a court of sessions. It also says that any trial before such court, the evidence of which the witness shall, as his examination proceed, be taken down in writing either by the presiding judge himself or by the dictation in open court, just like the magistrate's court. That also happens in the court of sessions. In the same format, it will be taken down in writing either by the presiding judge or by his dictation in open court, or under his direction and superintendence by an officer of the court appointed by him. And such evidence shall ordinarily be taken down in the form of a narrative, or it may also be taken down in the form of a question and answer, and so taken down shall be signed by the presiding judge and shall form the part of the record, just like we had read in the previous section. Now let's move on to section 277. It talks about language of record of evidence. So what will be the language in which the evidence will be recorded? It says that if the witness gives evidence in the language of the court, then it shall be taken down in that language. Say for example, the language of the court is Hindi. So if the witness gives his evidence in Hindi, then that will be the language in which the court will take it down. Now, if he gives evidence in any other language, it may, if practicable, be taken down in that language. So, if the language of the person who is giving such evidence is something other than the language of the court, then it will be taken down in that language, and if it is not practicable to do so, then a true translation of the evidence in the language of the court shall be prepared as the examination of the witness proceeds. So, if it is necessary, then it will be translated in the language of the court, and such evidence will be so recorded and signed by the magistrate or presiding judge and shall form a part of the record, as we know. Now, where under clause B the evidence is taken down in a language other than the language of the court, say for example it is taken in such a language that is not used in the court, that is a different language than the language of the court, then a true translation thereof in the language of the court shall be prepared as soon as practicable. So, a true translation, that means each and every such word that is taken down shall be translated, and it will be given the exact same meaning in that translation as well. Now, this translation will be recorded and signed by the magistrate or presiding judge and shall form a part of the record. Now, provided that when the evidence is taken down in English and a translation thereof in the language of the court is not required by any of the parties, then the court may dispense with such translation. So, if the entire evidence is taken down in English and say for example the language of the court is Hindi, but neither of the parties claim that they need a translation of such, both are okay with the English format, then it will not be translated and the court will dispense such translation. Now let's move on to section 278. It says procedure in regard to such evidence when completed. So as the evidence of each witness that is taken under section 275 or 276 is completed, so when such evidence is completely recorded, then it shall be read over to the person in the presence of the accused, and if in attendance or of the pleader if he appears by pleader. So when that person is himself present, it will be read over to him, and if he is not himself present, then it will be read over to his pleader if he appears by pleader, and shall if necessary be corrected. So there is also this provision for correcting such evidence that is taken down. Now if the witness denies the correctness of any part of the evidence, say for example it is read over to him and there is a certain part to which he has any kind of objection, instead of correcting the evidence, the magistrate or the presiding judge may make a memorandum thereon of the objection so made by the witness and shall add such remark as he thinks necessary. So the court will not go on correcting the evidences. He shall rather make a memorandum as to in which of the parts there was an objection raised by the witness, and he shall put such remarks as he thinks necessary. So that will be the procedure. Now, if the record of the evidence is a language different from that has been given by the witness, or the witness does not understand that language, so say for example the witness has given the entire evidence in Hindi and now it has been translated to English and the witness does not know that language English, then the record shall be interpreted to him in the language in which it was given. So it will be interpreted in Hindi to him. Now section 279 talks about interpretation of evidence to accused or his pleader. So whenever any evidence is given in a language not understood by the accused, then if he is present in the court, then it will be interpreted to him. Now, if he appears by pleader and the pleader does not understand that language, then it shall be interpreted to such pleader in that language as well. So, whoever may be present, either the person who is giving such evidence or his pleader, if they do not know the language in which it was translated, then it will be interpreted in the language they understand. Now, when documents are put for the purpose of formal proof, it shall be in the discretion of the court to interpret as much thereof as appears necessary. So, the same procedure will be followed in case of a document as well, that is put for the purpose of formal proof. If such document is not understandable by the person or his pleader, then the court may in its discretion interpret as much of the document as it appears necessary for doing so. Now, section 280 talks about remarks respecting demeanor of witness. Now, when a presiding judge or magistrate has recorded the evidence of a witness, he shall also record such remarks as if he thinks material respecting the demeanor of such witness whilst under examination. Now, let's move on to section 281, which talks about record of examination of accused. So, this section talks about the procedures in which the accused is examined. So, it says that whenever the accused is examined by a metropolitan magistrate, then the magistrate shall make a memorandum of the substance of examination of the accused in the language of the court, and such memorandum shall be signed by the magistrate and shall form a part of the record. Plain and simple. Now, when an accused is examined by any magistrate other than a metropolitan magistrate or by a court of sessions, then whole of such examination, including every question that was put to such accused and every answer that is given by him, shall be recorded in full by the presiding judge or magistrate himself. So, when an accused is examined before a magistrate who is not a metropolitan magistrate, or the accused is examined before a court of sessions, then in those cases, the whole of such examination, including every question that was put to him and every answer that was given by him, will be recorded in full. That is the procedure. Now, if the magistrate himself or judge himself is unable to do so, owing to a physical or other incapacity, then he will direct and superintend an officer who is appointed in this behalf. Now, the record shall, if practicable, be in the language in which the accused is examined, or if it is not that practicable, then it will be in the language of the court. So, either of the two languages will be used, either the language that the accused understands or the language of the court. Now, the record shall be shown or read to the accused, just like any other witness. And if he does not understand the language in which it was written, then it shall be interpreted to him in the language which is understood by him, and shall be at liberty to explain or add to his answers. So, he can be provided with an interpreter so that he understands the language in which the record of such examination is taken down, and he shall be at the liberty to explain and add to his answers. That means he can further explain his answers and add to his answers. Now, it shall thereafter be signed by the accused and by the magistrate or presiding judge, who shall certify under his own hand that the examination was taken in his presence and that the record contains a full and true account of the statements made by the accused. So, after such taking down of the evidence, that written format of such examination will be signed by the accused and by the magistrate as well. So, both the accused and the magistrate will sign over such written format, and that signature of the magistrate will certify that such examination was taken in his presence, and the record will contain a full and true account of the statement that was made by the accused, and nothing in this section shall be deemed to apply to the examination of an accused person in the course of a summary trial. So, this section does not apply to summary trials. Move on to section 282. It says interpreter to be bound to interpret truthfully. So it shall be the duty of the interpreter, and he shall be bound to state the true interpretation of such evidence or statements. Now section 283 talks about record in High Court. It says the High Court may by general rule prescribe the manner in which the evidence of witness and the examination of the accused shall be taken down in cases coming before it, and such evidence and examination shall be taken down in accordance with such rules. So the High Court will make his own rule, and that rule will be followed in taking down of evidence or examination. Now section 284 talks about when attendance of witness may be dispensed with and commission issued. So in which cases exactly the attendance of a witness before a court may be dispensed with, and instead a commission may be issued for taking such evidence. That is mentioned in this section. It says where it cannot be procured without an amount of delay, expense or inconvenience. So where there is an amount of delay or an amount of expense or an amount of inconvenience, in either of the three cases, if it is under such circumstances be unreasonable. So if it becomes unreasonable to procure such examination or evidence without amounting to delay, expense or inconvenience, then in that case the court or magistrate may dispense with such attendance and may issue a commission. Now provided that where the examination of the President or the Vice President of India or the Governor of a state, or he may be an administrator of the Union Territory, if the evidence or examination is needed of either of these four persons, then it shall be necessary for the ends of justice that a commission shall be issued. So there are no other procedures to do this. The magistrate or the court that is ought to take such examination or evidence have to issue a commission for such witness, and the court may also direct that the amount that the court considers reasonable to meet the expenses of the accused, including the pleader's fee, be paid by the prosecution. So it will have to be paid by the prosecution if the court directs to do so, that such amount must be provided for the expenses of the accused, including the pleader's fee, if the court considers reasonable to do so. Now section 285 says that if the witness is within the territories to which this court extends, then the commission shall be directed to the chief metropolitan magistrate or chief judicial magistrate within whose local jurisdiction the witness is found. The commission shall be directed to the chief metropolitan magistrate or the chief judicial magistrate under whose jurisdiction that witness is found. Now if the witness is in India but in a state where the court does not extend, then the commission shall be directed to such court or officer as the central government may specify. Or if the witness is in a country or place outside India and arrangements have to be made by the central government with the government of such country or place where the witness is residing, then the commission shall be issued in such form and directed to such court or officer and sent to such authority for transmission as the central government may by notification specify. So in both the cases we understand that the central government will be playing the crucial role of directing as to which court or which officer shall the commission be forwarded to. Now let's move on to section 286. It says execution of commissions. So this section contains the procedure of execution of such commissions. It says the magistrate that is receiving a receipt of the commission shall summon the witness before him or proceed to the place where the witness resides and shall take down his evidence in the same manner as prescribed by this code in trials of warrant cases. When a magistrate receives a receipt of the commission, then he shall summon the witness before him or proceed to the place where he resides. Either of the two will be done. And he shall take down the evidence in such manner as prescribed under this code in cases of warrant cases. Now, section 287 talks about parties may examine witnesses. So, the parties to any proceeding under this code where a commission is issued may respectively forward any interrogatories in writing which the court or magistrate directing such commission will think relevant to the issue or not. So, if an commission is issued to examine a witness, then either of the two parties that are concerned with that case may forward interrogatories in writing which the court or magistrate who is directing such commission will think as to the relevancy of such issue, and then he shall delegate such interrogatory to the person who is to execute the examination of such witness. So the parties may forward interrogatories to the court, and if the court thinks fit, he will forward such interrogatory to the delegated person who is supposed to take such examination of the witness. Now, any such party may appear before such magistrate, court or officer by pleader, or if not in custody, in person, and may examine, cross-examine and re-examine the said witness. So this subsection allows any party or his pleader to examine him, cross-examine him and re-examine him as the case may be. Section 288 talks about return of commission. It says after the commission is issued and has been duly executed. So the commission was issued and it was duly executed. After that, it shall be returned together with the deposition of the witness examined thereunder to the court or magistrate who had issued such commission. So after the commission is executed, it will be returned with the deposition of the witness on whom the commission was issued, and it will be returned to the court or magistrate that had issued the commission. And such commission shall be open at all reasonable times to inspect by the parties. So the parties can inspect at any time. It will be open at all reasonable times to be examined by the parties or to be inspected by the parties, and it shall also form part of such record. Now, any deposition so taken, if it satisfies the condition that are prescribed by section 33 of the Indian Evidence Act, then it may also be received in evidence at any subsequent stage of the case before another court. So if it follows the prescribed conditions of section 33 of the Indian Evidence Act, then such evidence or deposition may also be received in evidence at any subsequent stage of the case before another court. Now, section 289 talks about adjournment of proceedings. It says the enquiry, trial or other proceedings may be adjourned for a specified time reasonably sufficient for the execution and return of the commission. So after the commission is been issued, then the enquiry, trial or other proceedings can be adjourned for a specified time which is reasonably sufficient for the execution and return of the commission. Now section 290 talks about execution of foreign commissions. It says that the provisions of section 286 and 287 and 288 that are so much related in this case shall be applied. That is what subsection 1 says. Now subsection 2 talks about the courts, judges and magistrates that are referred to in subsection 1. They are the court, judge and magistrate who is exercising his jurisdiction either within an area which is falling under India or to any other country or place that is outside India. Now section 291 talks about deposition of medical witness. So the deposition of a civil surgeon or other medical witness taken and attested by a magistrate in the presence of the accused or on commission may be given in evidence in any inquiry, trial or other proceedings under this code. although the deponent is not called as a witness. So, whether the deponent is called within a witness or not, that doesn't matter. If the deposition of a civil surgeon or other medical witness is taken and attested by a magistrate in the presence of the accused or on commission, then it may be given in evidence in any inquiry, trial, or other proceedings. Now, the court may, if it thinks fit, and shall, on the application of the prosecution or the accused, summon and examine any such deponent as to the subject matter of his deposition. So, the court is at liberty to examine any deponent regarding the subject matter of his deposition on the application of the prosecution or the accused. So, he will summon him and examine him. Now, section 291A talks about identification report of magistrate. It says any document that is purporting to be a report of identification under the hand of an executive magistrate in respect of a person or property may be used as evidence in any inquiry. So, if the executive magistrate has under his hand identified a document, then that may be used as evidence in any inquiry, trial, or other proceedings under this code. And although such magistrate is not called as a witness, so even if that magistrate is not called as a witness, then also the evidence can be so used. Now, provided that where such a report contains a statement of any suspect or witness to which the provisions of these sections of Indian Evidence Act apply, then such statement shall not be used under this subsection except in accordance with the provisions of those sections. So, section 21, 32, 33, 155 and 157 of the Indian Evidence Act will prevail over section 291A of the CRPC if such a report contains a statement of any suspect or witness to which these provisions apply. And if it thinks fit, it shall, on the application of the prosecution or the accused, summon and examine such magistrate as to the subject matter of the said report. So, if the court thinks fit, or if either side of the proceedings, that is either the prosecution or the accused, whoever may be, if they apply before such court through an application that the magistrate shall be examined as to the subject matter of the report, then he may be summoned for that purpose. Now, what does section 292 talk about? It talks about evidence of officers of the mint. So, let's understand which officers include in this section. The officers who are appointed in a mint. Mint means a place where currency notes are printed, or any note printing press, or any security printing press, including controller of stamps and stationery, or any forensic department or division of forensic science laboratory, or any government examiner of question document, or any state examiner of question document. So, all these persons fall under this term officer. Now, if such officer has made a report under his hand about a document, then if it is submitted to him for examination and report in course of any proceedings, then it may be used as evidence in an inquiry, trial, or other proceedings, and although such officer is not called as a witness. So, even if such officer is not called as a witness, still his report may be submitted in the court as an evidence, just like the magistrate that we read about in the previous section. Now, if the court thinks fit, then he may summon and examine such officer as to the subject matter of his report, but provided that no such officer shall be summoned to produce any records on which the report is based. So, he will not be asked to produce the documents upon which the report was based, but he may be personally called before the court through a summon to give examination regarding such report. Now, without prejudice to the provisions of section 123 and 124 of the Indian Evidence Act, so it says that without disturbing the provisions of 123 and 124 of the Indian Evidence Act, no such officer shall be permitted to give any evidence derived from an unpublished official record on which the report is based, or to disclose the nature or particulars of any test applied by him in the course of examination of the matter or thing. So these are confidential matters. These will not be disclosed, or he will not be forced to disclose such. What are they? They are any unpublished official record on which such report is based, or any nature or particulars of any test that was applied by him in the course of examination of that matter or thing. So these things will not be published, or these things will not be made to disclose such facts and matters. Now, such can be done only with the permission of these persons. So the exception lies within this subsection. It says, with the permission of the general manager or any officer in charge of the mint, or note printing press, or security printing press, or forensic department, or forensic science laboratory, or the government examiner of question documents organization, or state examiner of question document organization. So the general manager or any officer in charge of these places may give permission, and that will be the only exception where such officer will be permitted to give evidence on any unpublished official record or any nature or particular of any test that was applied to him in the course of examination. Now let's move on to section 293. It talks about reports of certain government scientific experts. So it says that any document that happens to be a report made under the hand of a government scientific expert to whom this section applies, it may be put as an evidence in any inquiry, trial, or other proceedings, and the court may, if it thinks fit, summon and examine as to the subject matter of this report. And where any such expert is summoned by a court and he is unable to attend personally, then he may depute any responsible officer working with him to attend the court. If the court has not expressly directed him only to appear personally, now he may either appear personally or depute any responsible officer who is working with him, where the court has not expressly directed him to appear personally. And if such officer is conversant with the facts of the case and can satisfactorily depose in the court on this behalf, then only such responsible officer will be deputed by this person, this officer. Otherwise, he will have to personally appear before the court. Now, subsection 4 says that this section applies to the following government scientific experts, namely any chemical examiner or assistant chemical examiner to the government, the chief controller of explosives, the director of the fingerprint bureau, the director of Haffkine Institute, Bombay, the director, deputy director, or assistant director of a central forensic science laboratory or a state forensic science laboratory, the serologist to the government, or any other government scientific expert that is specified by notification by the central government for this purpose. So all these experts are considered to be government scientific experts, and this section shall apply to these experts. Now let's move on to section 294. It talks about no formal proof of certain documents. So where any document is filed before a court by the prosecution or the accused, so either of the parties may file such document. The particulars of every such document shall be included in a list, and the prosecution or the accused, as the case may be, or the pleader for them, shall be called upon to admit or deny the genuineness of each such document. So, the particulars of all such documents shall also be included where any document is filed before any court in the form of a list. So, a list will be given which will specify all the particulars of such document, and either the prosecution or the accused, as the case may be, or their pleader shall be called upon to admit or deny the genuineness of such each of such document. Now the list of such documents shall be in the form as may be prescribed by the state government, and where the genuineness of any document is not disputed, so there is no dispute regarding the genuineness of a document, then in such case such document may be read in evidence in inquiry, trial or other proceedings without proof of the signature of the person to whom it purports to be signed. So where it is already decided that the document is genuine, which means the genuineness of the document is not disputed, then in that case that document will be read in evidence without the proof of signature of the person to whom it purports to be signed. Now, provided that any court may in its discretion require such signature to be proved. So whether the document is genuine or not, it is entirely upon the discretionary power of the court to require such signature of that document to be proved. So he may take the document as genuine, but still he may require that signature to be proved. Now section 295 talks about affidavit in proof of conduct of public servants. So when an application is made before the court and allegations are made therein respecting any public servant, so where an application is made before the court to put forward allegations against a public servant, then the applicant, that means the person who has filed such application, may give evidence of the facts alleged in the application by affidavit. So he will have to submit such application along with an affidavit, and the court may, if it thinks fit, order that the evidence relating to such fact be so given. So when he files an affidavit along with that application, then the court will permit, if it thinks fit, that evidences regarding such fact be so given. Now section 296 talks about evidence of formal character on affidavit. So if the evidence of any person whose evidence is of a formal character be given by affidavit, then subject to all just exceptions, it will be read in evidence in enquiry, trial or other proceedings under this code. So where a person gives evidence of a formal character with affidavit, then irrespective of all just exceptions, it will be read in evidence in any enquiry, trial or proceeding under this code. Now the court may, if it thinks fit, and shall on the application of the prosecution or the accused summon and examine any such person as to the facts contained in his affidavit. So where any such application is filed before the court along with an affidavit, then the court may, if it thinks fit, and shall, if any party, that is if the prosecution or the accused, whoever may be, files an application before the court in regard to such application, or if the court thinks fit, the court will summon and examine any person as to the facts contained in his affidavit. Now section 297 talks about authorities before whom affidavits may be sworn. So who are those authorities that before whom an affidavit can be sworn? It says that the affidavit can be sworn before any judge or judicial or executive magistrate, or any commissioner of oaths appointed by High Court or Court of Sessions, or any notary public under the Notaries Act. Affidavits shall be confined to and shall state separately such facts as the deponent is able to prove from his own knowledge, and such facts as he has reasonable grounds to believe to be true. And in later case, the deponent shall clearly state the grounds of such belief. So it says that affidavit shall be confined to those facts only that the deponent is able to prove from his own knowledge, and he shall state separately such facts that he has a reasonable grounds to believe to be true. And in case of any fact that he has reasonable grounds to believe to be true, the deponent shall clearly state those grounds for such belief. And the court may order any scandalous and irrelevant matter in the affidavit to be struck out or amended. So the court has the power to do so. It can strike out or amend any part of the affidavit that is scandalous or irrelevant. Now section 298 talks about previous conviction or acquittal, how proved. So where there is a previous conviction or an acquittal of a person, then how will that be proved in a subsequent case? It says, by an extract certified under the hand of the officer having the custody of the records of the court, in which such conviction or acquittal was held to be a copy of the sentence or order. So if in the previous suit such person was either convicted or acquitted, whatever may be the case, so an order must have been passed in regard to such conviction or acquittal. Now that order or sentence must have a copy. So that copy will be in the custody of the records of the court. The officer who is in charge of such record of the courts will certify under his own hand an extracted certified copy, and that will be the proof of the previous conviction or acquittal. Also, in case of a conviction either by a certificate signed by the officer in charge of the jail in which the punishment or any part of such punishment was undergone, or by production of the warrant of commitment under which the punishment was suffered. So also in a conviction case where the officer in charge of a jail in which that accused served his punishment or underwent his punishment, that officer in charge will sign a certificate, and that will be the proof of such conviction. Also, by production of the warrant of commitment under which the punishment was served, that will also be a proof of such conviction, together with, in each of any cases, evidence as to identity of the accused person with the person so convicted or acquitted. So these proofs be put together with the evidence that the identity of the accused person and the identity of the so convicted or acquitted persons are same and identical. So that proof and these two proofs will be combined to form the actual proof of any previous conviction or acquittal. So this is the procedure. Now let's move on to the last section of this chapter, that is section 299, which talks about record of evidence in absence of accused. So what happens in this case is that, say for example, there is an accused person who has absconded. So he has fled. Now there is no immediate prospect of arresting him. So chances are that he will not be immediately arrested. There is no possibility for such. Now in this case, if the prosecution gives any witness for examination before the court, then what will the court do? The court will examine such witness and record their deposition, but such deposition will only be used as evidence against such absconded person on the arrest of such person. So once the person is so arrested, then such evidence that was taken while he was an absconder and such deposition so taken while the accused was absconding will be given in evidence against him if such deponent is dead or incapable of giving evidence, or cannot be found, or cannot be procured without an amount of delay, expense or inconvenience that would be unreasonable. Now subsection 2 says, if it appears that an offence punishable with death or imprisonment for life has been committed by some person or persons unknown, that means the persons who have committed such offences are unknown, then in that case the High Court or the Sessions Judge may direct that any magistrate of the first class shall hold an inquiry and examine any witness who can give evidence concerning the offence and any deposition so taken may be given in evidence against any person who is subsequently accused of the offence. If the deponent is dead or incapable of giving evidence or beyond the limits of India. So, if it appears before the High Court or the Sessions Judge that an offence is committed by a number of persons, the offence is of such nature that it is punishable with death or imprisonment of life, and such persons are unknown, then in this case the High Court or the Court of Sessions may direct any magistrate of the first class to hold enquiry and examine witnesses who can give evidence concerning the offence, and any deposition so taken may be given in evidence against any person who is subsequently accused of the offence, if such deponent who gave such evidence is now dead or incapable of giving evidence or beyond the limits of India. So that's all in this video. If you like my videos, then don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.